Couple things about me. Well, first, the book you've seen. It's also, if you don't want to spend the $10, sorry, Tom, you can go up in the sanctuary and read it for free, which is sort of nice because you can walk around and look at it.
They've actually been put aside.
They've been put aside, but I could tell you the pew where they are hidden. It was exciting to me the day that it came out. Somebody said that Amy and Andy Lucas's daughters were doing the book. It's a tour, and I have never been so happy as I was hearing and seeing them scamper here and there looking. That was the point, and I was delighted for it. A couple words about me. You think you know me, and you probably do. But I just want to say very clearly, I am not an artist, I am not a theologian, and I am not an historian. And this class is about all of those. So we are on shaky ground here. What I am is a very interested person who is not afraid to ask questions, much to the dismay of my family. And I do not mind doing some digging to figure it out. I do read an awful lot of history, and what I like about history is when it relates to other things. What goes on in this geographic area affects that. What happens at this time affects what's at that time. And I like pulling those things together. And the stained glass thing, because it is art, theology, and history, has all kinds of threads. The topic is really tough because you start investigating and you go down this path and you go down this path, and finally you realize you're about a gazillion miles from where you thought you would be, and you're really nowhere near the topic. But it's been very interesting. And you have to keep pulling yourself back like that. First off, I would really like to give 3 shout-outs, give credit where credit is due, and I want to be sure it's very loud, and I'm glad this part is being taped because I really want this to be remembered. There are 3 people that, without them, Gospel in Glass would not have happened. The first is Marilyn Meek. Back 25, 30 years ago, she kept telling me, Katie, you're interested in Christian symbolism. Look at the windows, look at the windows, look at the windows. It got to be sort of old, but I did, and the windows got me hooked. That was 25, 30 years ago. Then about 5 years ago, it occurred to me that there was an essay in all of this, and I had learned an awful lot just in a very random fashion about the windows. And it was interesting, and I thought if I do a little bit of digging, it will get more interesting. So I talked to H.B. Mertz. He's my second shout out. He owns Renaissance Glassworks down in Peters Township. They do new installations of stained glass. They do restorations. They do repairs. They know what they're doing. And HB is the owner of that. He's not the craftsman, but talking to him, if you get him talking, the stories just keep coming, and it's wonderful. He encouraged me, and he gave me a tour of our stained glass upstairs. We walked around. He really got my appetite whetted. But we never talked about it after that day. Then I think it was 2 years ago, this fall, there was a class in this room called Christianity and the Arts, and many of you probably, I'm seeing all kinds of shaking, yeah, you were there. Brian was there for sure, because one day he talked on architecture, and he gave 10 minutes of that class, 10, 15 minutes, to HB to talk about stained glass. I'm interested in architecture, I came. I made sure I was there that day. And I could not tell you what either of them said. I could not tell you especially what HB said. I could not tell you what kind of slides they had, what kind of angle. But I do know that that afternoon, all of my papers that I had put aside were on my dining room table. I had put them aside because I wasn't interested. Nobody in his right mind would be interested. This was a stupid topic. It was a waste of time. But it ended up on my dining room table. I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, research, and I finally sent the results to Tom O'Boyle, our newly hired director of communications. Tom read my draft, and then he said, we have to talk. And I said, oh, okay. And I went into his office, and he said the nicest things. It was wonderful. He liked this, he liked that. It was great. And then, and this is what you have to know about Tom, because it might happen to you. He got really close, and he said, the thing is, you have to rewrite all of it. That is the kind of guy Tom is. And I will say, He's over there breathing. He is on this planet, and that is because I have great restraint. He's on staff. Be careful. But Tom also had vision. He knew that this was a story that was worth telling. He knew that with good graphic design, if you look at the book and you see the kind of font, the kind of color, the layout, the size of the book, how things are ordered, it would be great. He knew a great graphic designer. It happens to be his son-in-law, Scott Westgate, who is incredible. When I first saw the layout with Scott's first draft of the graphic design, I was speechless, absolutely speechless. Tom also knew that it required good photographs, and he knew John Schisler, who lives down here somewhere near Markham School, is a professional photographer, came up, did a marvelous job of photography. I did not know how good a job of photography John had done until I started going to other churches, and they would say, oh, we have a book, let's show you our book. And in fact, they would say, you can take our book. And I would take the book home, and I would look at their photographs of stained glass, and it was always dreadful. And I realized, yes, we were very fortunate. Tom had the vision, and he knew how to do this. He knew how to get people involved, and he had the vision that this could be what it was. Plus, he had me rewriting it, which actually turned out not to be such a big deal. It was a massive reorganization of paragraphs and some threads to make those paragraphs connect in their new order. But he was right. Even at the time, I knew he was right, but I still restrained myself. What I'm really interested in is stained glass in worship. There's stained glass in private homes, there's stained glass in museums. You can go to churches all over the world and see the stained glass, and you're there. It's not a church, it's a museum. Looking at it, thinking of it that way, thinking of the people back then, not thinking of the people in the pew today. I am not so stupid as to think that the glass makes a difference in our worship. I will not say that. But I will say I've worshiped in this room, in that room upstairs for 40 years, and I can't believe that something of that atmosphere, that aura, isn't part of my worship. I'd be stupid not to think that, although I do not understand it. Maybe you understand it, but I'm interested in how windows are in worship, how they are today. We have a place of worship, we come here to do something, and we have this decoration. What does that mean? Now, we'll see how this goes. We've got 5 weeks to talk about this. Today we will talk about the rose window and a little bit of a lot of the background of our church, because we are part of really the second congregation of a church. We'll talk about the rose window today. Next week, it's Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. The best week. We'll talk about the big window in the back. When I say I'm interested in stained glass, this is the one they say. And then I'll say, well, about those other windows. And they'll say, what other windows? Because this is truly the only window that people see. It's magnificent. And we'll spend a hunk of time talking about that. It's all Jesus. There are also the windows in the chapel, what used to be the chapel. I call them the chapel windows, not because I miss the chapel. I know we need the meeting room. I know we need the choir room. But these windows are 5 windows from the Gospels that were meant to be seen, again, as a backdrop to worship, and they're meant to be seen as a set of 5. So we will include those because they're all Jesus, again. The next week, we'll talk about Christian symbols. This means the aisle windows and these little thing at the top, it's called the kite, that have a Christian symbol. The sanctuary is full of other kind of Christian symbols, and we'll talk about that too. This will also include the gathered and scattered doors that are not in the sanctuary. The following week, we will talk about the 2 transept windows. This is the Old Testament window. It's on the south side, and I like how the photograph picked up the reflection of the light on the wall. I thought that was pretty cool. Having some troubles here. This is the New Testament window. It's the Apostles' window on the opposite side. We'll talk about that. That's time too. We will also spend the last class talking about the craft of stained glass. I'd like to bring in a lot of things from HB's shop, the actual kind of glass, what is glass, how do they make it, what makes it magical, what makes it beautiful, and we'll talk about that kind of thing. This plaque, and I appreciate it's going to be hard to see from the back, it said, "This window presented by the Heron Hill United Presbyterian Congregation, chancel window by the Sabbath School." It's referring to the big Jesus window and the rose window that's over the chancel in the front. I saw this plaque decades ago, and I thought that that meant the windows came from another church. I was wrong. But it really got me started. There's a story here. Why do we have those windows? Why do we have the plaque? We also have this plaque on the back wall. It says, "In memory of the Heron Hill United Presbyterian Church, Pittsburgh, PA, organized as the 33rd Street United Presbyterian Church, October 31st, 1889, moved to Heron and Webster Avenues, October 9th, 1910, and relocated to Mount Lebanon Township, Washington Road and Rockwood Avenue, January 15th, 1929. We are part of that congregation. It sounds like 3 congregations. It's really 2. Heron Hill is up on the hill. And there are a couple stories about the founding of the church. One is anecdotal, which I really like, and the other one's just plain old, good old, solid history, which can be proved. The anecdotal one is that this area of the city where the church was on 33rd Street, if you're familiar with the Strip District and you think of all those 15th, 16th, you know where your stores are, you know, we're going to park in the Strip District, 17th, 18th, 22nd. Eventually you get down to 33rd, where it comes across Smallman, it comes across Penn, it dead ends on Liberty. In the old days, pre-cars, it went up the hill, and it sort of followed the contour of the hill, and it ended up where we have the Peterson Event Center on Pitt's campus now, on top of that hill. That's a lot of land in between. Now we know it as the Hill. At the time, it was known as a community called Minersville. In fact, there's Minersville Cemetery with signs that say Minersville Cemetery. The word miner in the title gives you a clue as to the economy of the town, that neighborhood. It was coal mines, tough, hard coal mines. Hard people working in those, doing hard work, living hard lives. And one day, there was a dead body found on the grounds of one of those coal mines. I'm not sure whether it was in the coal mine or just among all the sheds and paraphernalia and whatever kind of stuff you've got on the grounds of a coal mine. The body was so decomposed, it was obvious it had been murdered, but you had no idea who it was, what age it was, anything about the person. So you would never know, number one, who the victim was, and you would never know who the murderer was. This story touched a gentleman named Henry Kane. He was a member of First Presbyterian Church downtown, that he could live in a city where that happened, that we have a murder, that there's a person missing, nobody knows. And it touched him greatly. What do you do? What can you do in response to such a thing? Well, what he thought you could do, and what he did, was spearhead the establishment of a Sabbath school in Minersville. He probably got some First Pres Church people behind him. This is the kind of history where you go down that thing. I'm talking about stained glass, but now I'm talking about a murder on the hill with a guy who sold shoes from First Church. I mean, you go down these paths. And they did establish a Sabbath school. I don't quite know what they did, but it obviously met on the Sabbath, and it was obviously Christian education for the children. Probably involved some kind of hot meal, safe place to be on a Sunday, a way to meet other people, to find out that there's another kind of life that can be lived. That was going on. There were other churches up in Minersville, but a number of people, probably connected with the Sabbath school, wanted a church. They petitioned the presbytery in 1888 to look into this. And the presbytery said, yeah, we should do some church planning up there. We should plan a church. We should put the muscle of the presbytery behind founding a church. They worked with the folks at 8th Presbyterian Church, which is about a block from where Mercy Hospital is now. It's probably a parking lot. And those folks got together with the folks up in Minersville. And they, in October 31st, 1889, signed the papers with the presbytery creating the church. The Sabbath school was part of it. We're not quite sure where it met. There were a couple old schoolhouses up there where they did meet. And they continued that way. It's fun to go back to the city plots. You can see on 33rd Street the outline of what they call 33rd Street Church. And then all of a sudden, that becomes very faint in the old city maps, and there's a new building and a new property line, and where it says 33rd Street on the city maps, 33rd Street is in parentheses, and Heron Avenue is in big letters. In other words, the church did not move. But you can't be on 33rd Street. You can't be the 33rd Street Church if there's no 33rd Street. So they named the church Heron Hill UP because it's on Heron Avenue, and the neighborhood became Heron Hill instead of Minersville.
That's the predecessor of Polish Hill, just for locations.
And you go down, and you keep going down these things. I've been to this site. This is what it looks like in the old days. And I went to Google Maps, and it looks like this now. The building is still there. It was sold in 1929 to St. Luke's Baptist Church. It's an African-American church. And it looks pretty good. I mean, it's got a good roof, parking lot's in good shape. I mean, maybe not new and spick and span, but the grass is mowed, which is more than could be said for a lot of the vacant lots around that.
We need to send him Jack there, don't we? Yeah, right.
It would be fun to go to the church. I was surprised. This church was built in 1910, and there's a lot of stained glass. Now, I drove all around. You can drive around this. On the corner of Webster and Heron Avenue on the hill, right where the middle hill becomes the upper hill. A lot of stained glass. And I kept thinking, I will see what proves that they took the windows out of that building and put them in ours. And you don't see the proof. I would like to go in, but just haven't. It might be an interesting field trip for a number of us if we ever wanted to do that, either on a Sunday morning or not. Still is a viable place. We have all the session records from this time because eventually it became Beverly Heights Church. If you ever want to read the old session records, they're fascinating. Michelle Balfe is the caretaker, and she is updating them continually. I mean, not every day. The church records are largely people accepted into membership, baptisms, confirmations, deaths, marriages, people. And it's a delight to read those old session minutes because they would have a meeting to accept new members, but they just didn't say we accepted new members. We talked with them about their faith. They were joyous in their proclamation of their faith in Jesus Christ. It went on like that. It was wonderful. And they were so excited on the basis of faith to welcome the new people. There were a couple other interesting things, which makes me sort of angry. In fact, I said something to Michelle about it, but she wasn't having any parts of it. There was a story, one of the Sabbath school assistant superintendents wanted to resign his post. So he sent the letter of resignation and to the session and said, I don't think a Christian should be asked to do unchristian things, and that's why I want to resign. What? What did they ask him to do? But we don't get that detail. We don't know. There were also two people, two households, two whatever, requested letters of transfer, which are normally just sort of, yep, send the letter of transfer, fine. Except these people wanted to transfer to another church in the neighborhood. And you could tell, they said, we talked about this for a while. And then somebody finally suggested, why don't we go talk to him, see what's up? So they did. And the people decided not to transfer their membership. But again, what's going on here? What's happening? Who knows? At the end, through this time, the 1910s, 1920s, demographics were changing. We started off with a murder, and as Tom said, Katie, you got into murder, now you're getting into white flight. But it was changing. As if you think of world history in Eastern Europe, there was a large Jewish migration from Europe to the New World. A lot of Jewish people ended up in Pittsburgh, and at that time there were quite a few synagogues and temples on the hill. Affordable housing close to where you wanted to be. You would move in there, you could get your community together, start up. There was also the black migration, the African American, some of those great migrations from the South, from the rural South, to come to the North and work in the factories and the mills here. Again, affordable housing, very centrally located. At the same time, they were building the Liberty Tunnels, opening up vast swaths of ground for bedroom communities like Mount Lebanon. The presbyteries saw what was coming here in Mount Lebanon, bought the property, knew that a church would be here eventually, fully intending to plant a church here. But they had this Heron Hill UP church, which was not doing so well in its neighborhood. But instead of just shutting it down, letting it die a slow death, they said, let's close it down. Let's sell the building. People can go to other churches, and we will transfer the charter to this crowd in Mount Lebanon that don't know yet that they're a congregation. And that's what happened. We have all the session minutes from the last Heron Hill Sunday are very wistful. We celebrated communion for the last time. Very short, very sweet. And the pathos, just sad. There's also, and if you're a lawyer, I apologize. At the time I was looking for addresses and names, and the documents about transferring the charter are not about names or places. It's all about legal stuff. And it is, it's very legal. Who does what, wherefore. But it is also very clear in those papers that if the bank account is spent by this congregation, and it would be, because they've sold the building, they do have whatever assets they've got, a plaque has to be in this building saying so. And that's why we have the plaque. I think it's the only plaque in the building like that. If you go to Heinz Hall, you're at somebody gave the water fountain, somebody gave the doors, somebody gave the mirror in the ladies' room. I mean, we don't have that kind of thing here, is that right? And I think it's very intentional. But the legal document says this has to be in the building because the money was spent, and it was spent on windows. When they were building this building, there was a building committee and there was a stained glass subcommittee under that. And again, Michelle Balfe has all the access to these records. And there was a question. The stained glass committee had a payment due at the stained glass company. Could they draw on that money? Yes, they could draw on the Heron Hill money, and they did, to pay the bill. This window presented by the Heron Hill United Presbyterian Congregation, chancel window by the Sabbath School. I think the actual money probably paid for more than that. The 33rd Street Church would have been 50 years old in 1939, and this church honored that. They went to great lengths to find everybody, especially from 1889, but anybody who was also on the books at Heron Hill as what it became. And had a big party, and we have the guest book from that time with all the names. They came from all over the country. And wouldn't you come too? It was a chance to see people you haven't seen in a long time. Now, I will apologize for this next Phooey. Yeah, if I just bang it, it advances. How about that? I apologize for this terrible slide. I've got these old slides from the 1930s, the 1910s, whatever. I do have copies over here from what I copied. The originals are bad too, but they got worse as I blew them up for this. They're on the chair over there. You can take a look. Don't take them, but you can take a look. This is the building as it originally was in 1930. It ended. Now, imagine yourself upstairs, sitting in the pews, and you see those side aisle windows, okay? Now, where that side aisle ends is a wall. That's the size of the sanctuary. And you can sort of see how that is with a little punch out for the choir. We've got a photograph of the people squeezed into the choir loft. There was a central pulpit. It's not very big. If you go down those side aisles where the wall would be, you could go through this door and get to the choir room. You could go through that door and get to the pastor's study. This room would have been here in some form, which gives reason why we had a stage. There really wasn't a lot of space. I have a feeling there was a kitchen, but when they added on in 1950, they did a masterful job. Go outside and see where that wall would have been. And you can tell the stained glass windows on the side aisles stop, and you can see where it would have been and how well it tied in. It's very masterful. Now look at the top. You see the chancel window up there too. It's the rose, sometimes called a rose window, sometimes called a chancel window. This is how the building looked, sort of short and stubby. There's a little push out there on the back corner where the pastor's study would have been. And then I like this picture. This is how it looked in 1953 when they put the addition on. You can see that the transept comes out, and then there's that whole back wing. Doesn't feel like an addition now. It feels very organic, very connected. What I really like about this picture is there are no trees. Therefore, go home, plant trees. You're doing people a favor in 50 years. Think of it. Can you imagine the side of that building if we didn't have the trees? Can't do it. But that's what it looked like. Now, the original windows were the Jesus window on the back wall here, the side windows along the aisles and the windows above, the rose window in the front, and what we call the vestibule windows. The rose window in the front would have been on an outside eastern wall. Many churches aligned along an east-west axis. And a lot of times, if you really have a choice, a church architect will make that happen. Maybe they didn't have a choice. Washington Road's out there. They're going to put the front doors on Washington Road. Maybe it just happened. Because if we were on the other side of the street, like St. Paul's Episcopal, obviously it's pointed the other way. But the beauty of trying to make it so that the people are facing east, people are facing the sunrise, people are facing where the sun comes up, the beginning of the day, the resurrection. Plus, if that window is on an outside wall, you get the morning sun through it. And if you're in a church that's got an outside eastern wall, wow. Fantastic. The rose window, it's called a rose window because it's round, and imagine you're looking into the center of a flower and it unfolds. Big rose windows in big cathedrals might go into as many as 24 rays coming out. Ours is shaped like a piece of pie, obviously with about 6 slices. And it's tempting to find great symbolism in the number 6. But sometimes you just have to, it's an artistic as well as an architectural thing. We're having a discussion. I happen to know somebody who changes the light bulbs for the rose window. And just this morning I learned, I thought there were about 6 fluorescent bulbs behind that thing giving its light. And it's always been fun when one of those bulbs starts to burn out and, fluorescent bulbs flicker. And the poor ushers in the back, the rose windows flickering, Well, I talked to Jack about it today, and he says there are easily 20 lights, fluorescent bulbs behind that. Periodically, and I will get on a orator's soapbox at this point, people want to put a whole, 2 or 3 box loads of LEDs behind that and really light it up. Wouldn't that be great? Yeah. Number one, do the LEDs mimic sunlight? There's a certain color to sunlight. We had a physicist in here. They could tell us all about what kind of colors you need in that light to make it white light, but also to make it sunlight. I was in a church where and I'm not going to say the name of the church. I think they did put a couple box loads of LEDs behind their rose window, which is also now on an inside wall, like ours, with the addition. They've also put an addition on. And yes, it was bright. You could see all the colors. But it happened to be a winter day that I was at worship at that church, a winter morning, and it was overcast. So that window was shining like the sun, and it didn't match anything else in the room. And I spent the time thinking, wait, is this really part of, is this one of those windows? And it's just doesn't look like it because it's so doggone bright. If you're going to get a box load of LEDs, fine. Be careful. That's my soapbox. Just be careful. But we are glad that the fluorescents are changed so they don't flicker, and we have all that. There are, a window also is an architectural thing. Think about the big Gothic cathedrals in Europe. They could build high and heavy roofs. How heavy was the ceiling at Notre Dame, the roof? I mean, tons and tons and tons of weight. But they've managed to put in windows which sort of take away the strength of the stone to hold the weight. But the window itself becomes an arch. We think about the flying buttress enables the weight to be offloaded from the wall. The buttress will take part of the weight. In the same way, instead of, if we just had square windows, all that weight would come down to the square at the top. But we have a round thing, and the weight can go around. Here, it's not such a big deal. Our building is not that big compared to Notre Dame. It's just not, we don't have that kind of weight, but we do have the roundness. There's also a thing in stained glass called tracery, and that is, you can't really see it here. Go upstairs and take a look. You'll see stonework throughout the stained glass. That's helping hold the load of the glass, but it's also providing a path for the weight above to get down. So when you're building a window, you might think as a stained glass arch, you can just do this and this and this, but you have to think about the weight of the window, the weight above it, and how does that all fit. So when they put in 6 slices of pie in our window, they're thinking about a lot of stuff. And maybe because this isn't such a big structure, they just did what they wanted to. But I'm very aware that they are doing architecture at the same time. This is the center of it. And think of that, that's glass. Individual pieces of glass tied together. It's too bad, it's so far away we can't see it. But go take a look. It's gorgeous. I like the colors. If you look at our windows upstairs, they do match color-wise. They blend color-wise. I'm no artist, but I know it works. One day I made Dave Caldwell, poor Dave Caldwell. I said, I want to walk around the sanctuary with an artist. And he's just saying, well, it's just because that's how he sees it. And I said, yeah. It was interesting. He was noticing color and marveling at it just as I would. So I thought, okay, maybe I do have a bit of an artist's eye. I don't know, does it look like a flower as you look into it? Let me see. One thing about our windows is that they're all Jesus. I did not realize this until I was talking to the craftsman at HB's shop. His name is Mike McElhatton. He's a fantastic guy. And he says, if you have a Presbyterian church, chances are the windows are all Jesus. Ours are not. We have Jesus in the back, Jesus a lot. And there's people that have not looked at the transept windows would say, yes, we do have all Jesus. But we have all Scripture. We do have that. No saints, no donor names. It's amazing what we don't have, which is good, and I like that. Questions? Comments? Criticisms?
I could just clarify one thing.
Good.
About the rose window, it was actually relocated when the addition was put in. It was not where it is right now.
Yeah.
It would have been probably
I think it's 20.
15 feet away, and they actually moved it back. And there's a picture. Karen Sauerbier found a group of poster boards that were all tied together that said building edition 1950, history of the building edition in 1953, keep for posterity. She happened to be cleaning out the preschool and found these. And if you look in there, there's even one picture of the framework being put into the wall for the window being moved. So it's, where it is now is not where it was, but it was important enough that they wanted to relocate it with the addition.
And maybe they had to because they took their money.
Follow the money.
We have to follow the money. Other comments?
I'm just wondering about the theme of the stained glass, in reflecting that as Protestants, we don't usually, I was just thinking, wait, why don't we have Jesus? And then I thought, oh, of course we can't have Jesus because of the whole image problem of, like the Catholic churches, I'm thinking more in terms of cathedrals, they can have, the crucified Christ. We don't usually have the image of Jesus before us during worship, and therefore, okay, that makes sense. So we have beautiful glass. But was there any talk or worry about having Jesus?
No, Jesus is no problem having Jesus.
Oh,
But next week when we look at the Jesus windows, we can raise that question when we see what they did include about Jesus. I mean, we have 4 Gospels packed with information of stuff he did, places he went, things he said, things he did. And we have 10 illustrations of that. Maybe you would pick out a different 10. I will say, this is not, like a regular design. It's not a mathematical design like a Celtic design or a mosaic, something you might see at the Alhambra with a lot of almost mathematical pathways. And I've been in churches where that is the kind of direct decoration that it is. And it's very distracting, I think. This, it helps you worship, does it? I mean, it doesn't interfere with it. It's beautiful if we had the morning sun coming through it, but it's not distracting. You don't end up thinking about the window, do you? That's my, I mean, if you say you do, well, then that's truth too. But there's not a lot of, I think sometimes we sort of see it as wallpaper, but it's very intentional that it not be distracting. We'll see that especially on the aisle windows, which are very close to you when you're in the pews. Yes, there's some stuff there, but it doesn't pull you in 100%. You still have so much of you available for hymns, for scripture, for sermon, for prayer. You're not thinking about this. And maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, maybe that's not true. It's very personal. Art. This glass is a company called Pittsburgh Stained Glass. The windows that went in when the addition went in were from a Hunt stained glass studio. We'll talk more about that. Serendipity. Jack gets a lot of junk mail in his box upstairs, and there was some junk mail from Pittsburgh Stained Glass as I was continuing the writing after HB got me back to work. And it was from Kirk Weaver, who happens to live down the street from us. We didn't know that. And he is the third generation owner of Pittsburgh Stained Glass, and his kids don't want to go into the business. And he's looking at his files, and he was sort of he got the idea he was wanting to wrap it up. And he had sent out a blanket letter to all his customers that, do you still have your windows? Are you interested? And Jack's looking at his junk mail, and he says, well, I've got this wife who's sort of involved in stained glass. So Kirk came over, and to hear him talk and his stories of the glass. I tried to get the third generation owner of Hunt Stained Glass Studios, who did the 1950s windows, and he was very gracious to send me the stuff, but he wasn't really interested. It's sad, you know, these firms, faith and craft both, father to son, and kids are doing well, they just don't want to do it. In fact, he said his one kid who can do who's doing investment banking in Chicago, is a real whiz at stained glass. He can put a window together like nothing.
Katie, you mentioned that the rose window is a typical feature of an eastward-looking window. Is the design of ours, there are nuances to it, I suppose, that are different from ours, but is the styles typical in both Protestant and Catholic churches? You know?
I wouldn't want to go either way. I will say, usually in a Catholic church, you've got a lot of saints you want to include. And chances are you also want to make more of Mary. And that decoration will include that. There's, I've been looking at the windows in Chartres Cathedral, which is outside Paris. And it's one of the original Gothics. I think it went up in 1205. I mean, and the stained glass is original. When I look at that, I think 1205, they were doing that quality work. It's incredible. And the number of windows is absolutely blinding. But again, Catholic, they've got to include much more. I have tried, they have rose windows, but a lot of times when you get out to the end of the pie, there's some saint out there, about that big. Or, you know, and they'll do 24. What does 24 mean? That might mean something. I have really spent some time staring at these windows, trying to figure out if there's any symbolism to them. Any kind of leaf, any kind of flower, any kind of, and I can't come up with it, which is very comforting to me. Ours is simply restful, beautiful. But if we're coming from another tradition, if I'd spent the last 40 years staring at something else, who knows? But I find this being beautiful but not distracting is good for me. Anybody else? Tom, do you want to close this in prayer, please?